The mahogany-paneled walls of Courtroom 304 seemed to absorb the morning sunlight streaming through tall windows, casting a warm glow across the faces of those gathered for what should have been another routine day at the Montgomery County Courthouse. Judge William Barrett, his silver hair neatly combed and his black robe pressed to perfection, adjusted his reading glasses as he reviewed the morning's docket. Marcus Thompson had spent the previous hour watching other cases from the gallery's third row. At 28, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had already achieved significant success in life. His navy suit was well-tailored, his tie perfectly knotted, and his leather briefcase contained documentation of his spotless driving record over the past decade. Case number 2024-TR1842, the court clerk announced, her voice echoing through the chamber. Marcus Thompson, approaching on a red light violation. As Thompson rose from his seat, he caught a glimpse of his reflection in the polished floor, the image of a man who had risen from a modest background to become the senior software engineer at one of the city's most prestigious tech firms. He had prepared meticulously for this hearing, gathering traffic camera footage, witness statements, and even a technical analysis of the yellow light timing at the intersection in question. "Good morning, Your Honor," Thompson began, his voice steady and professional. "I'd like to present some evidence regarding the circumstances of this." Judge Barrett raised his hand, cutting Thompson off mid-sentence. "Mr. Thompson, the citation clearly states you proceeded through a red light at the intersection of Maple and 4th. The judge's voice carried the weight of 20 years on the bench. Are you disputing the basic facts of the case?" "No, Your Honor, but there were extenuating circumstances that I believe are relevant." Thompson reached for his briefcase, pulling out a carefully organized folder. "I have documentation showing that the yellow light at this intersection lasts only 3.2 seconds, which is below the Department of Transportation's recommended minimum off." "Mr. Thompson," Barrett interrupted again, his tone sharpening. "This court is not interested in technical arguments about traffic light timing. The fact remains that you chose to proceed through a red light, endangering yourself and others." The air in the courtroom grew heavy. Several attorneys waiting for their cases watched with increasing interest as the exchange continued. Among them was Sarah Chen, who had paused her preparation for an upcoming case to observe the unusual tension building between the bench and the defendant. "Your Honor, I understand the seriousness of the violation," Thompson persisted, maintaining his composure. "However, I believe the context is important for a fair evaluation of the—" "That will be enough," Barrett declared, his gavel striking with unexpected force. "This court finds you in contempt for your continued disregard of judicial authority. The standard fine for your violation is $300. However, given your disruptive behavior and apparent unwillingness to accept responsibility, this court imposes a fine of $1,500. Next case." The gallery erupted in hushed whispers. Thompson stood motionless, his carefully prepared defense still clutched in his hands. From her position near the back, Sarah Chen quickly jotted down notes, her legal instincts telling her she had just witnessed something that would ripple far beyond the walls of Courtroom 304. As Thompson gathered his documents, his hands slightly trembling with a mix of shock and indignation, he caught the sympathetic glances of several observers. What had begun as a routine traffic hearing had somehow transformed into something far more significant, though none of those present could yet grasp just how far-reaching the consequences would be. Sarah Chen's heels clicked purposefully across the courthouse's marble floor as she headed toward the cafeteria, her mind still replaying the morning's events in Courtroom 304. With 15 years of legal experience, she had developed an almost instinctive ability to sense when something wasn't quite right in a courtroom. Today, that sense was screaming at her. Finding a quiet corner table, she spread out her morning notes alongside her untouched chicken salad. The stack of case files she brought for her own upcoming trial lay forgotten as she began researching Judge Barrett's recent traffic violation rulings on the courthouse's public access terminal. "Mind if I join you?" Sarah looked up to find Maria Gonzalez, the courthouse clerk from room 304, standing by her table with a coffee cup in hand. Sarah gestured to the empty chair, grateful for the unexpected opportunity. Maria had worked at the courthouse for over 2 decades. If anyone knew the patterns of Judge Barrett's rulings, it would be her. That was quite a scene this morning. Sarah ventured carefully, keeping her tone neutral. Maria stirred her coffee thoughtfully. In all my years here, I've never seen Judge Barrett impose a fine that high for a simple traffic violation. 300 is standard. Sometimes 400 if someone's really disrespectful. She paused, glancing around before continuing. But 1,500. That's unprecedented. Sarah pulled out her phone, quickly calculating. 5 times the standard amount, she murmured, making another note. Have you noticed any patterns in his? Her question was interrupted by a notification ping. A local news website had just posted a story about the morning's events. Someone in the courtroom had recorded a brief clip of the exchange on their phone, against courthouse rules, but the damage was already done. The comments section was exploding with reactions. As Sarah scrolled through the comments, she noticed recurring mentions of similar experiences in Judge Barrett's courtroom. She began documenting usernames and dates, her legal pad filling with potential leads. The story was spreading faster than she'd anticipated. Marcus Thompson is still in the building, Maria mentioned quietly, gathering her things to return to work. He's been sitting in the public records office for the past hour. Sarah checked her watch. Her own case wasn't scheduled until tomorrow morning, and something about this situation demanded her attention. Gathering her materials, she made her way to the records office, finding Marcus surrounded by stacks of court transcripts. Mr. Thompson, she approached carefully. I'm Sarah Chen. I was in the courtroom this morning. He looked up, his earlier composure somewhat restored, but his eyes reflecting a mix of determination and frustration. I'm looking for precedent, he explained, gesturing to the transcripts. There has to be some standard for fine escalation. Sarah pulled up a chair. There is, she confirmed, and what happened this morning doesn't align with it. She hesitated before continuing. I've been practicing law in this county for 15 years. Would you be interested in discussing your options? Before Marcus could respond, his phone buzzed. The local ACLU chapter had already reached out to him after seeing the viral video. Sarah noticed his screen and smiled. Looks like I'm not the only one who thinks this deserves a closer look. As they began comparing notes, neither Sarah nor Marcus realized they were setting in motion a chain of events that would reshape the entire county's judicial landscape. Outside the records office window, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps, where a small group of reporters had already begun to gather, drawn by the growing social media storm. The video clip that shook Montgomery County's judicial system lasted exactly 47 seconds. Captured by a law student's shaking phone, it showed just enough of the exchange between Judge Barrett and Marcus Thompson to ignite public interest. By sunset, what had begun as a local courthouse incident had transformed into a trending topic across multiple social media platforms. Jessica Wong, the second-year law student who had recorded the video, sat in her small apartment staring at her phone in disbelief. Her post had already garnered over 50,000 views and was climbing rapidly. Local news stations had been calling her nonstop, and her inbox was flooded with interview requests from national media outlets. I just thought it was important to document, she explained during a Skype interview with Channel 8 News. In law school, they teach us about judicial discretion, but they also teach us about proportionality. What I witnessed didn't align with anything we've learned about fair judicial practice. Meanwhile, in the newsroom of the Montgomery Daily Herald, veteran court reporter Michael O'Malley was piecing together a different angle. His deep dive into court records revealed something interesting, a subtle but noticeable pattern in Judge Barrett's fine structures over the past 5 years. The numbers tell a story, O'Malley muttered to himself, updating his spreadsheet. His research showed that fines in Barrett's courtroom had steadily increased over the years, but not uniformly across all demographics. He needed more data to confirm his suspicions, but the preliminary findings were troubling. Across town, Marcus Thompson's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. His LinkedIn profile had exploded with messages of support from other tech professionals, many sharing their own courthouse experiences. Several legal advocacy groups had reached out, offering assistance and resources. The sudden attention was overwhelming, but Thompson remained focused on working with Sarah Chen to build their case. The social media attention is a double-edged sword, Sarah advised during their evening strategy session at her office. It brings awareness, but it also puts enormous pressure on all parties involved. We need to stay focused on the legal aspects. Their discussion was interrupted by a breaking news alert. Judge Barrett had issued a brief statement through the court's public relations office. The Montgomery County court system maintains the highest standards of judicial conduct. All fines are issued in accordance with established guidelines and the specific circumstances of each case. The statement only fueled further discussion. Legal experts began appearing on local news programs, offering varying interpretations of judicial discretion and its limits. Professor Elmer Martinez from the State University Law School provided particularly insightful commentary. What makes this case fascinating is how it highlights the delicate balance between judicial authority and accountability. When does discretion cross the line into arbitrary punishment? These are questions that deserve careful consideration. By nightfall, the courthouse steps had become a gathering place for local residents, though not in protest. Instead, people came to share stories, many bringing documentation of their own experiences in various courtrooms. Local law students, inspired by Jessica Wong's video, began organizing a courthouse observation program to document and analyze fine structures across different judges. Sarah Chen watched the evening news coverage from her office, taking careful notes. The story had evolved beyond a single incident into something larger, a conversation about fairness, accountability, and the nature of justice itself. Her phone lit up with a text from Marcus Thompson. "Have you seen the response from the State Bar Association?" She hadn't, but as she pulled up their official statement, she realized that tomorrow would bring even more developments. The digital wildfire had sparked something that couldn't be easily extinguished, a demand for transparency that would reshape their local justice system. Judge William Barrett sat in his chambers, staring at the family photographs that lined his mahogany desk. 30 years of legal service captured in silver frames, his law school graduation, his first day as a public defender, his judicial appointment ceremony. Each image told a story of dedication to justice, yet today those same images seemed to question him. "Your Honor." His clerk Amanda Peters knocked softly before entering. "Judge Martinez from the Civil Division asked to speak with you." She paused, then added, "And the Chief Justice's office called again." Barrett nodded, his expression unchanged. As the media storm swirled outside, unexpected allies had emerged. Judge Diana Martinez, having worked alongside Barrett for 15 years, had witnessed countless instances of his fairness and compassion. She found herself troubled by the contrast between the man she knew and the portrait being painted in the press. "Bill," Martinez began, settling into the leather chair across from his desk. "Do you remember the Henderson case from last year?" Barrett's expression softened slightly. The Henderson case, where he had reduced a single mother's traffic fines and helped her find a payment program. Or the Johnson hearing, where he had stayed late to ensure a working father could make his court appearance after hours. These stories existed too, but they weren't trending on social media. "The public sees one moment, Diana," Barrett replied, his voice carrying the weight of recent sleepless nights. "They don't see the thousands of cases where I've tried to make the right call." Meanwhile, across town, investigative reporter Michael O'Malley was interviewing Barrett's former law partner, James Chen, no relation to Sarah. "Will was always meticulous about the law," James recalled, shuffling through old case files. "Back when we defended low-income clients together, he would work through the night finding precedents to help them. Something about this current situation doesn't add up." The reporter's article would reveal a more complex portrait. Barrett's early career fighting for civil rights, his pro bono work with community organizations, his establishment of the county's first night court program to accommodate working individuals. But it would also show a gradual shift in his judicial approach over recent years, subtle changes in fine structures, increasing rigidity in courtroom protocol. Back in the courthouse, Sarah Chen had discovered something interesting in Barrett's early career records. As a public defender, he had once argued passionately against excessive fines, calling them a mechanism of systemic oppression. The contrast between those words and his recent actions was striking. "People change," Marcus Thompson remarked, reviewing the documents with Sarah. "But sometimes they need a reminder of who they used to be." The afternoon brought an unexpected development. Judge Barrett's daughter, Dr. Rachel Barrett, a sociology professor at State University, gave an interview to the local news. "My father taught me about justice and fairness from an early age," she said, her voice steady but emotional. "He's devoted his life to these principles. I hope people will remember that a person's legacy is built on more than a single moment." As evening approached, Barrett left his chambers, walking the empty courthouse corridors. He paused in courtroom 304, now quiet and dark. Standing at the bench where he'd made thousands of decisions over the years, he reflected on the weight of each one. His phone buzzed. A message from his old law professor. "Remember what you told me when you first wanted to become a judge. Justice isn't about being right, it's about doing right. Those words still matter, Bill." Barrett touched his worn gavel, an implement of authority that suddenly felt heavier than ever. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, in the solitude of his courtroom, he began to see his role and his recent actions in a different light. Sarah Chen's office buzzed with quiet energy at midnight, the soft glow of desk lamps illuminating walls now covered with timelines, data charts, and case citations. Marcus Thompson sat cross-legged on the floor, his laptop balanced on a stack of legal texts, analyzing patterns in a decade's worth of traffic court data. "Look at this," Marcus called out, his software engineering background proving unexpectedly valuable. "I've written a program to analyze the fine distributions. There's a clear inflection point about 3 years ago." His fingers flew across the keyboard, generating a vivid visualization of the data. Sarah leaned over his shoulder, her reading glasses perched on the edge of her nose. "That timing coincides with the county budget cuts," she mused, reaching for a file from her desk. "The courthouse lost a third of its administrative staff that year. And the pressure to generate revenue increased," Marcus added, pulling up another dataset. "But that doesn't explain the disparities in fine amounts." Their investigation had evolved into an unlikely partnership. Marcus's technical expertise combined with Sarah's legal knowledge created a formidable investigative team. They'd spent the past week building a comprehensive case, working late into the night, fueled by takeout dinners and determination. "Sarah," Marcus spoke softly, breaking a long silence. "Why are you doing this?" "Really?" He looked up from his laptop, genuine curiosity in his eyes. Sarah paused her review of case files, considering the question. 20 years ago, my father faced a similar situation in another state. Nobody stood up for him." She smiled slightly. "Plus, I've always believed that the law should be a tool for positive change, not just punishment." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock. Jessica Wong, the law student whose video had started it all, stood in the doorway clutching a stack of papers. "I've been monitoring social media responses," she reported, settling into a chair. "More people are coming forward with their stories. But here's what's interesting. I'm also finding cases where Judge Barrett showed remarkable compassion." The three of them pored over Jessica's findings. Stories emerged of Barrett reducing fines for elderly defendants, arranging payment plans for struggling families, even dismissing cases where strict application of the law would have caused undue hardship. "It's like 2 different judges," Marcus observed, adding the new data to his analysis. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from Maria Gonzalez, the court clerk. "Check the archives from 2019. Something happened during the State v. Henderson case. Changed everything." 2 hours and several coffee runs later, they found it. The Henderson case, a routine traffic stop that escalated into a tragedy. Judge Barrett's ruling had been legally correct, but had led to devastating consequences for the defendant's family. "This could be our angle," Sarah said, straightening up. "Not to attack, but to understand. To show how pressure and past experiences can unconsciously influence decisions." Marcus nodded slowly. "A system is only as impartial as the humans who run it," he said, quoting from one of Sarah's earlier cases. As dawn broke over the city, their strategy took shape. This wasn't just about one fine or one judge. It was about examining the complex interplay between justice, human nature, and institutional pressure. Sarah gathered their materials, preparing for the upcoming hearing. "We're not just challenging a fine," she told Marcus and Jessica. "We're proposing a way forward, a chance for everyone, including Judge Barrett, to be part of positive change." Looking at their wall of evidence, Marcus felt a mix of emotions. "Whatever happens," he said, "we've already shown that one person questioning an injustice can lead to meaningful dialogue." The morning sun cast long shadows through Sarah's office windows, illuminating their work from the past week. They had built more than a case. They had created a blueprint for examining how justice is administered, one decision at a time. The appellate courtroom buzzed with anticipation on a bright Tuesday morning. Every bench was filled, with journalists and law students lining the back wall. Marcus Thompson adjusted his tie, feeling the weight of countless eyes upon him. Sarah Chen sat beside him, her normally pristine desk scattered with color-coded folders. Judge Elena Rodriguez, known for her fairness and sharp intellect, presided over the hearing. To everyone's surprise, Judge Barrett had requested to be present, an unusual move that set whispers rippling through the gallery. "Your Honor," Marcus began, standing with quiet dignity, "I'm not here today just to dispute a fine. I'm here to share a story about expectations, assumptions, and the human elements of justice." The room fell silent as Marcus spoke about his journey, growing up in a struggling neighborhood, earning a scholarship to MIT, becoming a senior software engineer. He shared stories of mentoring young students, of building programs to help underprivileged kids learn coding. "The day I appeared in traffic court," he continued, his voice steady, "I wasn't just a person who ran a red light. I was a professional who had prepared evidence, who wanted to engage in reasonable discourse. But I never got that chance." Sarah presented their meticulously gathered data, but with a surprising twist. Instead of focusing solely on disparities, she highlighted patterns of both strict rulings and compassionate decisions in Judge Barrett's record. "What we see," she explained, displaying Marcus's visualizations, "is not a simple story of bias, but a complex narrative about how pressure, experience, and institutional demands can influence judicial discretion." Then came the moment that would be remembered long after the hearing ended. Marcus turned to address Judge Barrett directly. "Your Honor, I've spent the past week studying your early career. I read about your work as a public defender, your advocacy for fair treatment, your creation of the night court program. Those actions show who you are at heart, someone who deeply understands that justice must be both firm and flexible." Judge Barrett, who had remained stoic throughout the proceedings, showed the first signs of emotion. His hands, folded on the desk before him, tightened slightly. "The fine you imposed on me was excessive," Marcus acknowledged. "But this hearing isn't about punishment. It's about recognition. Recognizing that we all carry burdens and biases, that we all need moments to step back and recalibrate our perspectives." Sarah rose to present their proposed resolution. Instead of simply requesting the fine be reduced, they had developed a comprehensive proposal. It included guidelines for fine structuring, a review process for unusual penalties, and most importantly, a program for regular dialogue between judges and community members. "We have an opportunity," Sarah concluded, "to transform a moment of tension into a model for progress." Judge Rodriguez listened intently, occasionally glancing at Judge Barrett. The courtroom remained hushed, aware they were witnessing something more significant than a simple appeal. Finally, Judge Barrett asked for permission to speak. Standing slowly, he faced Marcus in the gallery. In 30 years on the bench, he began, his voice carrying the weight of realization. I strive to embody the principles of justice, but somewhere along the way, perhaps I lost sight of the human element. Mr. Thompson's dignity today, his emphasis on understanding rather than accusation, has reminded me of why I chose this profession. As the morning sun streamed through the high windows, casting long fingers of light across the courtroom floor, something shifted in the atmosphere. This wasn't just about a traffic fine anymore. It was about the delicate balance between authority and empathy, between procedure and humanity. Judge Rodriguez would soon announce her decision, but the real transformation had already occurred in the silent exchanges and spoken truths of that memorable morning. The afternoon sun painted golden stripes across the conference room table where Judge Barrett and Marcus Thompson sat facing each other. 1 month had passed since the hearing, and what began as an adversarial encounter had transformed into something unprecedented in Montgomery County's judicial history. Your perspective on automated traffic systems is fascinating, Judge Barrett said, making notes in his leather-bound journal. I never considered how light timing could affect different communities differently. The two men were leading the first session of the newly established Judicial Community Dialogue Program, an initiative born from their case. Around them sat a diverse group, other judges, community leaders, tech experts, and law students, including Jessica Wong, whose viral video had started it all. Technology should serve justice, not just efficiency, Marcus explained, pulling up a presentation on his laptop. Let me show you what we discovered when analyzing traffic patterns across different neighborhoods. Sarah Chen watched from the doorway, smiling at the scene before her. Her law firm had received numerous calls from other counties interested in implementing similar programs. But what made Montgomery's initiative special was the genuine connection forming between its unlikely founders. Judge Barrett's morning coffee chats are becoming quite popular, Maria Gonzalez, the court clerk, whispered to Sarah. Every Tuesday morning, the judge now held informal sessions in the courthouse cafeteria, where anyone could discuss their concerns about the justice system in a relaxed setting. The transformation wasn't just personal, it was institutional. Judge Rodriguez's decision had gone beyond simply adjusting Marcus's fine. She had mandated a comprehensive review of the county's fine structure and recommended the implementation of an innovative sliding scale system that considered both the offense and the offender's circumstances. It's about understanding context, Judge Barrett explained to a reporter from the National Law Journal. Mr. Thompson taught me that justice isn't just about applying rules. It's about seeing the whole picture. Marcus had also grown from the experience. His software company now offered pro bono technical assistance to courts looking to analyze their data for potential disparities. He regularly spoke at law schools about the intersection of technology, justice, and human understanding. The real breakthrough, Sarah reflected during a panel discussion at the State Bar Association, wasn't in changing rules or procedures. It was in changing how people listen to each other. The conference room buzzed with energy as participants broke into small groups, each tackling different aspects of judicial reform. Judge Barrett and Marcus moved between the groups, their natural leadership styles complementing each other perfectly. Remember when you couldn't get me to stop talking in your courtroom? Marcus joked during a break, causing the judge to chuckle. Now I can't get you to stop teaching me, Barrett replied warmly. And I'm grateful for that. Outside the courthouse, the story had inspired similar initiatives across the country. Other jurisdictions began examining their own practices, not waiting for controversies to spark change. The Montgomery model, as it became known, showed how conflict could be transformed into collaboration. As the afternoon session wound down, Jessica Wong approached Marcus with news. The video's gone viral again, she said, but this time it's the clip of you and Judge Barrett at last week's community forum. People are calling it Justice 2.0. Sarah gathered her papers, preparing to leave for another meeting. She paused at the door, taking in the scene one last time. What had started as a story of conflict had become a lesson in transformation, proof that understanding could bridge any divide. Judge Barrett's voice carried across the room as he concluded the session. Perhaps the greatest justice we can serve is to remain open to growth, to listen to those we might once have silenced, and to remember that behind every case is a human story waiting to be heard. 6 months after the hearing that changed Montgomery County's judicial landscape, the courthouse plaza bustled with activity. Under a crisp blue sky, crowds gathered for the inauguration of the Center for Judicial Innovation, a first-of-its-kind institution born from the collaboration between Judge Barrett and Marcus Thompson. When I walked into traffic court that morning, Marcus began his keynote speech. I never imagined I'd be standing here today, but sometimes the most meaningful changes come from unexpected moments. The center, housed in a renovated wing of the courthouse, represented everything they'd learned. One floor was dedicated to technology labs where Jessica Wong, now a full-time staff member, led teams analyzing judicial data for fairness and efficiency. Another floor hosted community outreach programs, while the top level contained training facilities for judges from across the country. Sarah Chen watched from her seat in the front row, remembering late nights poring over case files. Her law firm had established a new division focused on judicial reform, inspired by the success of the Montgomery model. Today, she was signing a partnership agreement with 3 other counties to implement similar programs. The true measure of justice, Judge Barrett said, taking the podium, isn't in the punishments we deliver, but in the understanding we create. He looked different now, more relaxed, more engaged. His morning coffee chats had become so popular they had to be moved to the courthouse's largest conference room. The changes weren't just local. State legislators had taken notice, drafting new guidelines for fine structures based on the Montgomery experience. The Barrett-Thompson scale, as it became known, provided a framework for balancing accountability with circumstance. Maria Gonzalez, still serving as court clerk, had noticed another change. People aren't afraid to come to court anymore, she told the documentary crew filming the inauguration. They know they'll be heard, not just judged. The center's first initiative was already showing promise. A mentorship program paired judges with community members from different backgrounds, fostering understanding through regular dialogue. Judge Barrett and Marcus co-led these sessions, their own story serving as a powerful example of transformation. We're not just changing procedures, Marcus explained during a break in the ceremonies. We're changing perspectives. Every person who walks into a courtroom brings a story. Our job is to create space for those stories to be heard. The day's highlight came when Judge Rodriguez, who had presided over the original appeal, unveiled the center's mission statement, Justice Through Understanding. The words, etched in glass above the entrance, caught the sunlight, casting rainbow reflections across the gathered crowd. 6 months ago, Sarah reflected in her closing remarks, we faced a choice between conflict and conversation. Today, we're showing that justice works best when it works together with understanding. As the ceremony concluded, Judge Barrett and Marcus shared a moment away from the crowds. You know, the judge said, that traffic fine was the best mistake I ever made. Marcus smiled, and challenging it was the best decision I ever made. The plaza slowly emptied as evening approached, but the center's lights stayed on. Inside, a new group of judges and community members gathered for their weekly dialogue session. On the wall, a simple frame held the original traffic citation that had started it all, a reminder that positive change can come from the most unexpected places. From her office window, Sarah watched the sunset paint the courthouse in soft oranges and pinks. On her desk lay invitations from 3 more counties interested in the Montgomery model. The story that began with a contested traffic fine had evolved into something far more significant, a blueprint for making justice more just. And in courtroom 304, where it all began, a new sign hung beside the door. Every case is a story. Every person deserves to be heard.